Hello, dreamers, and welcome to this latest episode of California Dreaming. Before we get started, I have a few notes about the show. This is an independent one-woman production, which means I depend on you, the listeners, to help give the show more visibility. And there are a number of ways that you can help. You can leave a good rating and a review on whatever platform you listen to your shows on. You can recommend the show in true crime discussion groups and online forums. You can follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you're looking for more content to listen to and have a couple of dollars each month to spare, you can subscribe to Patreon. And if a subscription isn't your thing and you would still like to contribute, you may do so through PayPal using my email, californiapod@gmail.com. And before we dive into this second part of this series that we are currently in, I must provide you with a warning about this episode. It contains details involving violence, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and torture. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This is the second part of a series on the Cheshire murders. If you haven't listened to part 1, pause this, listen to episode 276 first, and then come back to this episode. We left off in part 1 with Joshua Komisarjevsky confessing to sexually assaulting the Petit's 11-year-old daughter, Michaela. I can't say for sure how much more graphic content may or may not be included as we continue on with this audio recorded confession, but if we come to more content that is similar to that, I will try to leave it again at the end, or to make sure to give you a sufficient amount of time and a warning to skip ahead or to stop listening. Okay, let's pick up from where we left off in Joshua's confession. In part 1, we stopped at the place where Joshua stated that he left Michaela's bedroom so that she could get dressed. He continued, "I went and checked on her older sister, and then I started to go downstairs to go check on the father, realizing that he's all the way in the basement and KK wasn't restrained at all. So I turned back and I stood outside the hall until she was done, then came back in and she sat back down on the bed, and I retied her feet. So she re-enters. Her face is not covered at this point, but yours is, so she can't see you. She can't see me. So you retie her. I retie her. I left her pillowcase off as well, so the only thing at that point was that she was tied just her feet. Did you restrain her back to the bed? Her feet were, but not her hands. Her feet were tied to the bed? To the bed. So she could not get up and walk out? No. Okay, go ahead. I then went downstairs to check on the father. He had, during this whole time, Steve kept calling me, giving me updates of where they were and what they were doing. And, okay, so while you were with the youngest daughter, the detective repeated some of the acts of child sexual abuse that Joshua committed in pretty graphic detail, so it doesn't need to be repeated. So while you're with the youngest daughter, basically, is what he's saying, Steve and the mom are still out to the bank? Yes. When you checked on the older daughter, did you have any sexual relations with her? No, I didn't. Okay, so you still have them. He's calling you for what reasons? It was for, well, the conversation was weird because it was more like he was having a conversation with himself. Like he was talking like he was talking to me. However, it was more for show. It came across as more of a show for the mom. What was he saying? He was like, so far everything's going well. And she was like very, 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 very well aware of the fact that she needs to comply or things could go very badly. So he was on his way to the bank trying to convince her to convince the mom. Yeah, it seemed like he was more trying to convince her than to update me about anything. Okay. Did he ask you at that time anything about pictures? I recall you saying something about pictures. No, I put them on for my own personal use. Okay, so he didn't ask you to send that picture that you took, those pictures of yourself? No. Okay, so he's trying to convince her that this is real and take the money and there won't be any problems, and he's calling you, kind of calling to update? Yeah, okay, go ahead. Because I was a little curious because they made it back so quickly. I was under the understanding that they were going to go all the way out to the Waterbury and use the bank out there. And it wasn't the mom's primary bank. Oh, okay, so they may have. I'm not sure what bank they actually used. On his way back, I'm not sure which Bank of America they actually did go to. Did they get the money? He did come home, back to the house with the money. He and the mother walked in through the sunroom, through the back. He had money in his hands. What do you call those things? Envelopes? The envelopes, yeah, money envelopes. Bank envelopes? Yeah. That said Bank of America? Yeah, Bank of America. Okay, how many of them? 4 or 5? 4 or 5? There was a stack of them. Did you actually see the money? I didn't actually see the money itself, no, just the bank envelopes. I actually reached for them, and then he yanked them away from me, and then this bag he put little odds and ends and jewelry. Where did he get the bag? It was from the mother's room. It was the mother's. Like a purse? Like a large purse type thing. He had been dumping valuables in there? Yeah, or semi-valuable stuff. All right, so when you reached for the money and he kind of pulled it back and put it in the bag without you ever seeing it? Without me ever seeing it, yeah. Okay, go ahead. There was also this weird conversation when he had called prior to getting back to the house. He was calling me to let me know that he was on his way, and I asked, did everything go all right? And he sort of sidestepped the question. And then I asked him, how much did you get? And he sidestepped that question as well. And I thought that was really odd, like he was trying to, I guess he was pulling a fast one on me. He'd just take off with the mom and leave me here at the house by myself. So there was a lot of tension in the air when he finally did get back to the house. Okay, so what happens when he gets back? When he got back to the house, he put the money in the bag. He sort of bluntly ordered me to retie the mom back on the love seat in the living room and tied her feet, and her hands were like we had always done, like in the bed. And then he pulled me to the side. We go into the dining room, which was on the other side of the house, and he says, very matter-of-factly, okay, you ready? We gotta kill him. We gotta kill him and burn down the house. And I'm like, I'm not killing anyone. There's no way. I'm not there. We have the money. There's not a problem, They've done everything. They don't know who we are. They can't recognize us. Why did he want them killed? He was upset with the fact that I had messed up and used his first name, and he was also going on and on about DNA. Why was he so concerned about DNA? Did he have sexual relations with the mom? Not to my knowledge. If anyone had anything, he would not have had the most to worry about DNA. It would have been me, but I wasn't worried about it because she had taken a shower. So I don't know why he was so up in arms about it. So you're arguing with him? Yeah, we're going back and forth about it. And he's like, well then, I'll kill the 2 daughters and you can kill the mom. And I was like, I'm not killing anyone. I was like, I don't know how to put it more matter-of-factly. There is nobody dying by my hand today. That's not going to happen. It can't. You didn't want to kill anyone? I did not want to kill anyone. Steve, even I'm doing with the father, I couldn't keep hitting him. I just couldn't do it, that sound, it's horrific. It's not going to happen. And we kept going back and forth about it. And finally he was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll take care of it all 3 of them. And he'd go. He was walking around with these stockings that he had. We had run out of rope at one point. Stocking? As in lady stockings? Yeah, apparently he used those for the rope. So he was walking around with the stocking, talking about he was going to just strangle them, all 3 of the women. And I'm sitting in the dining room, the formal dining room, which is on the other side of the house, and he leaves to go into the living room where the mother is. And after a couple of minutes, he comes back and then over to the dining room where I am, But then he leaves again and to the other end of the house and made it back and went back and forth like that, 4 or 5 times. What was he doing? It seemed like he was trying to psych himself for whatever, to strangle the women. Yeah, to do what he thought he needed to do. And I'm sitting there and I'm besides myself. I'm I don't know what to do. Where are you at this point? I was sitting in the formal dining room and everyone else is upstairs except for the mom and the dad who's in the basement. And you're downstairs with the mom and Steve? That's correct. I had a clear view of the stairway, the front stairway that goes upstairs. Then you start going around the corner and then you're in the kitchen. Then you go through the kitchen and you're in the living room where the mom was. And as far as you know, the father was downstairs in the basement. The 4th or 5th time that he had walked back into the dining room, he left me in there and then he was in there, the room for 15 minutes. Alone with the mom? Alone with the mom, yeah. And I'm assuming he's just still trying to psych himself up, at which time I hear this noise down in the basement, and I certainly recognized it as the bilkled door that led to the outside, which is where the dad was, which is right where the dad was. And I yelled, but at the same time, I jumped up screaming to Steve that the father just took off. He just left and was racing towards the room he was in, and then was coming back towards me. And as we were converging on the basement door, I can see behind Steve that the mother was lying lifelessly on the floor with her head on the love seat and her pants were down around her ankles. So she's, in your opinion, lifeless? Her pants are down around her ankles? That's correct. Which they hadn't been prior to this time? No, never. And did you check on her? Did you ask him what he did? No, because my priority at that point was the father getting out the basement door. What made you think she was lifeless? The color of her face was a deep, deep purple from the neck up, like bluish purplish, like pool of blood. Being an EMT, I have seen plenty of lifeless bodies, and I recognized the color as being quite lifeless. Her tongue was also sticking out of her mouth, and her eyes were very puffed up. Her eyes were puffed up? So your EMT experience tells you what? What do you think occurred? I was fairly confident that Steve had finally built up the nerve to strangle her. So it's at this point you think she's strangled and dead. Pants are down, so I make the assumption that he had also raped her. Okay, you didn't actually see him strangle or rape her, but that's your opinion of it? Right, that's my opinion. She's definitely lifeless in your opinion, dead at this time? Yes, that's true. Okay, so now you both head towards the basement. He stops at the basement door and barks at me to run down there and to check and make sure that he did in fact go out, which I did. I went down there and sure enough, he had definitely taken off out the back bilkled door. So the father basically escaped the house at this point? Yes, that's correct. Did you chase him? No, I went back upstairs and told Steve that he's gone. We got to get out of there right now. We have to leave right this second. So, up the stairs, you mean the first floor where the mom was lying already, motionless, lifeless? That's correct. Yeah, we got to get out. You want out? Yes, we have to go now, there's no option. Here, it's only a matter of minutes before the dad gets to the neighbors, or seconds even, before he gets to the neighbor's house and the police are called. And Steve's taking all this time, I don't know what he was thinking. He ends up taking the bag with the money in it and, shoving it into my chest and telling me to go to the car. And I'm like, where's the keys? Where's the keys? Where's the keys? And he's like, I don't know, over there somewhere. And we're going back and forth with our heads chopped off. And in the middle of this, he darts into the garage. I turn around and keep looking for the keys, and I turn back around and he's pouring a whole bunch of gasoline on the kitchen floor and down the hallway which leads to the stairwell. Now the mom is in the living room at this point. Yeah, which is where the kitchen floor was the living room, where the mom is, sort of like a sunken living room. Okay, so it's kind of connected? Yes, that's correct. Did he pour gasoline in there where the mom is? Yeah, I believe he did. I didn't see him pour gasoline on her, but there was certainly gasoline. There was definitely gas that reeked. You could smell it? Oh yeah, it smelled like, you light a cigarette and the place would blow apart. Okay, well, he goes up the stairs. He then went up the stairs with 2 bottles, and did you follow him up the stairs? I did. I followed him up the stairs because I couldn't understand, I was like, you can't seriously be contemplating burning these 2 girls alive. I was like, that's unconscionable. It's unreal. It's bizarre. This is really unreal. It's just not what, you can't do that. It's like, you just can't. And I was a little relieved, well, not relieved, but he had not poured it in the bedrooms, but he poured it up the stairway and down the hallway into the master bedroom. How do you know that? Because he was walking out of the master bedroom and you could see the gasoline on the carpet, leading back to which bedroom? The master bedroom, which is in the back. He walked out of the master bedroom, walked past me, back to the stairs. I went to KK's room, and there was no gasoline in there. She was still in her bed. She's still alive? Oh yeah, absolutely. Is her face covered? Yes, the pillowcase was kept over her face, but up enough so that she could breathe. Then I closed the door, and I went back down towards the stairway, past the oldest daughter's room. She too was sitting in her room, tied to her bed like she previously, and I closed that door and I went downstairs. Was she still alive? Absolutely. Why did you close the doors? I can't imagine anyone being burned alive, So I thought I fucked up, I got myself in this horrible position, but they did what they were supposed to do. There was no reason for them to die, They were compliant the entire way. Both, very bright young ladies. Even the mother shouldn't have died. She went out of her way to be, compliant? Yeah. Compliant to the T. No talk back, no nothing. Why is this happening? I don't understand this. This wasn't part of the plan. We were supposed to just get the money and get out. Hey, they haven't seen our faces, so what? I fucked up, I used your name. There's a million Steves in this world. I'm trying to buy some time, But they're tied up. Why didn't you untie them? I didn't even think about untying them. For whatever stupid reason, it just didn't cross my mind. You didn't untie them, but you closed the doors to buy them time. Just in hopes of buying time. Yeah. But you didn't untie them. Why? I didn't untie them. Well, in retrospect, I should have, but now, in retrospect, I shouldn't have fucking been there in the first place. But I get downstairs and, I'm yelling at Steve, we gotta go. It's already been 5 minutes now. And, I'm confident, there's an army of police officers right outside the door waiting to open fire on me as I open the door. So we went straight for the back door and Steve was right behind me. And I get out the back door and I'm going towards the back part of the house, which leads to the garage. The front side of the garage where the car's parked, and I turn around and Steven's not behind me anymore. So now I'm backtracking back into the house, and as I'm doing that, I'm looking through the sunroom, and I can see in the neighbor's yard that there's somebody plainly sitting there in the bushes watching us. And I'm like, this isn't happening. You can see outside? Yeah, once again, Steve's racing up the stairs. And you can see in the yard outside. No, I'm walking into the house. Oh, you're coming back in to see where he went? Yeah, I was like, well, where the hell did he go? What is he doing? He's racing up the stairs. I wasn't sure what he had at first until he comes racing back down the stairs and he throws one of the empty bottles into the kitchen. Empty bottles of gasoline. So he went back upstairs with another bottle of gas? With another bottle of gas, yeah. So how many is that? 3 or 4? 4 altogether. Okay, so there's 4. He went back up with the last bottle? That's correct. And what did he do with it? I wasn't up there. I was hoping that he was just pouring it into the office, because we didn't pour any gasoline, or he didn't pour any gasoline in the office. We had spent a lot of time sitting in the chairs in there. So you have no idea what he did with the gasoline. No, I can't say for sure what he did with it. He didn't tell you? He did not say anything at all, and I'm screaming at this point, we got to get out of here. This is madness. We finally raced out the door, out back. I have the key. I get into the car. I start it up, and as I'm starting up, Steve is just coming around the corner, and he poured the rest of the gas. He's stumbling with this oversized pack of matches, trying to light one, and he gets 2 of them, and none of them are lighting, and I keep telling him, we gotta go, and I can still see this person in the grass watching us. He barely gets one lit and flicks it. I see it sailing. I see the puddle of gasoline that was just sitting on the tile floor in the kitchen. The entire kitchen erupts. Ignites? Yeah, it was like a sea of flames. One match? Just one match lit it? Yeah, the 3rd one that he tried. Okay, so he was unsuccessful, but the 3rd one, he lights, ignites it. The 3rd one lights, ignites the pool of gasoline in the kitchen, and travels through. You could see it travel down the front hallway. Towards where the mother would be, or no, towards where the stairway would be. I already had my back turned, and I'm running to the door because I knew that the couch that the mom was dead against was doused. And I'm thinking in my mind, it's a confined space with gas vapors everywhere. I'm thinking like one of those action movies, like it blows out the windows. Yeah, so I'm racing out the door, and I reach around the corner and jump into a car. I put the keys into the ignition, and I start it up. And just as I start it up, Steve comes running out and jumps into the passenger side, and then I throw it into reverse. The vehicle is in reverse, and I hear a cop's siren, and then I look in my rear view, and there's an unmarked car just pulling up, blocking the driveway. Okay, which I proceeded to hit. The unmarked car. And when I was hit, it sort of jerked me, in which I turned the wheel in sort of this crazy arc up into, and I was driving backwards into the curb, and I went fast into the bushes. Now at this point, it's the house fully on fire. Can you tell if the house is on fire? I wasn't even looking. You didn't know at this time? I could hear the fire alarm going off, or the smoke detector going off. I figured that was going to happen anyway because the kitchen was fully in flames. The whole hallway and the kitchen was in flames. So you back up, you hit the unmarked, you try to go forward. I got caught up in some bushes, and I was trying to put it into drive, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't happening. I couldn't figure out how to drive anymore. Like I was just panic-stricken, and I didn't know how to drive. I literally forgot how to drive. And Steve grabs the shifter and throws it in the drive and yells, "Gas it," which I did, and took off the curb and onto the street. And looking around at this is what's happening, and it's happening like in slow motion. And I'm looking around, and there was cops everywhere. Every single gun was trained right at my head. And I was like, I'm gonna die today. Either they're going and I'm going away for the rest of my life, or I'm going to die. Okay, now you're fleeing the scene in the car. You're driving the homeowner's vehicle? That's correct. You already hit the unmarked. You drove through the front lawn, headed up the street, and, towards this little bend in the road, there's 2 Cheshire police cars parked, barricading the road. Then suddenly, an officer with a rifle trained right on me, some other officers off to the side. Did you try to run him over? I wasn't specifically trying to run him over, but I was trying to get away. So you weren't stopping? No, I wasn't stopping. I had to get through those police cars. There's no other way out. Did you hit the officer? I sure hope not. Okay, you don't know if you did or not. Did you hit the cruisers? I certainly hit the cruisers. And then what? The airbags deployed, and then it got really blurry for a little bit, and all I can hear in the distance, an echo, was get my hands out of the car, get out of the car, hands out of the car, come out slowly. Then it sort of felt like an eternity. I sort of complied, and I got out of the car and laid down, face down on the pavement. Did you say anything to the officers at the time? There was a lot of questions being thrown at me, and I was still like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Finally, one of the officers has gotten close enough for he was up putting handcuffs on, and then he asked how many people were in the house and who was there, and were there any other accomplices? I said there's absolutely no other accomplices. There's just me and him, and there's 3 people in the house, one of which I thought was Dad. Referring to the mother, that's correct. He again asked how many people were in the house or something to that effect, and I said 2 girls in the bedrooms upstairs, front-facing bedrooms, and that they're still alive, and he got on the radio or called or radioed it in. Did you tell him the house was on fire? I didn't, because I knew that he already knew, because he was just talking to a civilian or somebody was mentioning that to him on the radio. That's why I said to him, the 2 front bedrooms they're right there. There's 2 windows for each room, and the only 2 front bedrooms there. So at that point, you were basically caught and you were detained. That's correct. Arrested here, but you were transported here. And once you got here, I just want to reiterate the fact that I asked you early on, and when you mentioned this at the beginning of the tape, I asked you if you had any allergies or illnesses or were under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and you said that you were not. You were not allergic to anything, correct? No, I'm allergic to aspirin. Oh, you said aspirin, right. We provided you with lunch. That was part of the reason I asked you. You had McDonald's, you had soda, coffee, cheeseburgers. You were provided with the use of the bathroom. And the statement, the other written statement, all of that was voluntary and uncoerced by us. This is your doing. This is of your own free will, correct? Yes, I feel they deserve it. They earned this, and I fucked up. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. All right, what's going to happen now, Josh, is having said all that, the statement has been recorded. As you know, it will be transcribed into typewritten form. After this, you will be asked to read and sign the typewritten statement, which is your statement. Is that agreeable to you? Yes. Okay. Is there anything you would like to add? You kind of just said it, that you screwed up and the family was. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was strictly to go to the bank and leave. As far as your statement has been truthful. You're not saying that you strangled anybody, and you're not saying that you lit the match, and you're not saying that you poured the gas. Right. But obviously you were there, and you did all these other things that you did. You admit to assaulting the father. I did assault the father. And you had sexual contact with the daughter. Yes. So I adamantly deny any kind of strangulation or any of that. Did you help bind them up, tying them down? Yes, I admit that I did. You admitted freely to that. Yes. And shutting the doors. I was hoping to buy them time, obviously. They're alive in the house. Obviously, I should have done better. Okay. Thank you, Joshua. The time is now 6:28 or 18:28. This concludes the tape statement of Joshua Komisarjevsky. So Joshua's partner in this mess, Steven Hayes, he also provided a confession that was audio recorded for the police, but I haven't been able to locate it or listen to it or read transcripts of it. Articles about this case provide very little in the way of details when it came to what his confession consisted of, and that was back, after this first happened. However, I did find a podcast that some of you may have heard of before. It's called 15 Minutes With, and it's hosted by Joe Tomaso. And the whole premise of his show is that he speaks directly to inmates about their cases, but he also wants to get the message out there to young people who might be headed towards a life of crime, the importance of never ending up as an inmate in a prison or in the prison system. The host of the show actually spoke to Steven Hayes, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not completely sure when it was uploaded. I think the YouTube link said 3 years it was uploaded, so I guess around that time. So I'm going to share some of the details of what Steven Hayes had to say in his own words. I don't believe everything that he says, and I will point out when there are discrepancies between his confession and Joshua's confession, and I'll tell you which one I tend to believe more over the other. I will also provide links to the podcast so you can give it a listen if you want to hear this shit come straight from this guy's mouth. It's multiple parts. I believe there's 4 parts, but each episode, like the title says, is only 15 minutes long, if that. The host also attempted to contact Joshua Komisarjevsky to see if he wanted to conduct an interview, but apparently he is still actively appealing his conviction, so he declined the invitation. Steven Hayes' call came from a prison in Pennsylvania. I'm not quite sure what that's all about yet. I haven't fully researched, since this all happened. I read on Wikipedia that he transitioned to female. So I don't know. I will look more into it when we get to it. I'll see what kind of details I can find about why he's in a Pennsylvania prison instead of a Connecticut prison. Oh, you know what? That might have been a federal thing. That might be it. But he's in a state prison, though, in Pennsylvania, not a federal prison. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking out loud. Let me move on from this. Sorry. Apparently, Joshua and Hayes met while living at a halfway house in Hartford, Connecticut. And it was at that halfway house that they began to formulate this plan to pull off a home invasion burglary. If you remember in Joshua's confession, he made it seem like it was something he thought up after he had followed Jennifer and Michaela Petit home from that Stop and Shop trip. That he later on that evening hooked up with Hayes, that they sat around talking about robbing people at ATMs or whatever, and then Joshua suddenly remembered the mom and daughter with the nice car and the nice house. When Hayes started talking about the crime, he began right away making excuses. He started off by saying that going back as early as 2003, he struggled with drug addiction. He talked about having to spend time in prison over his drug problem, that he wasted so much time and money and lost relationships over it. He was in his addiction with his wife at the time, and there were also children involved. Hayes ended up in jail, and he described talking to his children on the phone from jail and how they called him out on his promises to stay out of prison. So right there, he's trying to tug at the heartstrings, because when his daughter told him over the phone that he probably needed to be there because he's not learning from his mistakes, that this conversation made him feel so bad that after he hung up the phone, he attempted to take his own life. After that, he said he sought help for his addiction and he stopped using. He talked about how when he got out, he kept working on his recovery. He started going to Alcoholics Anonymous, trying to do the next right thing, as they say. So Hayes here, to me, is just blowing a lot of smoke, because it all sounds like he's describing himself here as like this guy who's this loving husband and father who just happened to be struggling with this disease of addiction, that he's worked on his recovery so much and so hard that everybody around him is telling him that he's doing too much. He doesn't have to go all in with AA and recovery like this, like balls to the wall with all this stuff. And he's saying that these are his addiction friends, his drug buddies, because they want their friend back into the drugs with them. And Hayes, being the upstanding guy in recovery that's addicted to staying clean and drinking the AA Kool-Aid, he can't pick up a drink or a drug, because if he does, he knows that he will end up in jail or dead. And that's what his daughter said to him that caused him to hit his rock bottom. Personally, I don't believe one single word of that bullshit for 1 second. There's nothing about this man that would lead me to believe that there is anything that his kids or his wife could ever say to him that would get him to stop doing what he was doing. He's in AA or he's going to treatment because he has to in order to stay out of jail. So once he was released, he was sent to the halfway house and Joshua was his roommate. And that is how these two fools met. Hayes described Joshua as a quiet kid that kept to himself. He's somewhere like 15 years or so older than Joshua, if I'm remembering correctly. So they shared this room, and Hayes says that the two of them mostly hung out in their room, that he, the diligent and dedicated recovering drug addict that he is, while he was focusing solely on his sobriety, Joshua was focusing on his artwork, and that everybody else in the halfway house were doing nothing but drinking and getting high. So these two are like the saints, right? And everybody else are screw-ups. Next, he talked about trying to get into another recovery center where he claimed that he would have been able to have what he needed in working on his sobriety, but they told him there was going to be a wait of a couple of months in order to get in. So he goes and tells his daughter that he's working on getting into a place that's closer to his family, so he'll be able to see her. And this is going to be the best, healthiest move for him in order to make the goals that he had set for himself in terms of staying clean and staying out of jail. So Hayes apparently ended up getting into some other recovery situation or sober living type of place, I guess. At the time he had just been placed, Joshua had already checked out about a week before, so Hayes didn't really know where he ended up at. So when Hayes went to the new recovery center and he got his room, he walked in and there was Joshua again. By coincidence, they ended up roommates for a second time. And then a couple of weeks after that, they got a third roommate who was also working on his sobriety. Hayes said that he would talk to Joshua about recovery, but Joshua insisted that he didn't have a drug or alcohol problem. But Hayes kept talking to him, true to AA form, right? And eventually Hayes started getting Joshua to go to meetings with him, even though he didn't believe he had a problem. And eventually at a meeting one time, Joshua apparently stood up, introduced himself as an addict, and openly thanked Steven Hayes for helping him to realize it. So, right? These two pieces of shit bonded over Steven Hayes saving Joshua Komisarjevsky from the grips of addiction. So here's Hayes painting himself to be some kind of hero, right? Yeah. So then Hayes goes on to talk about how he ended up not getting a spot in the recovery house that he wanted because he had a urine test that came back dirty. What a surprise. And he's literally on this podcast telling us some 11 or 12 years after the fact that the dirty urinalysis test was a setup, that he was framed, that someone slipped him a Mickey and a sample that would test positive, right? Yeah, whatever. There's no way that Hayes is consuming any substances at all, right? Because he's just a stand-up guy that's saving people from addiction. Because he's working so hard to get himself into a recovery center that's closer to his family so he can fulfill his empty crackhead promises to his daughter. It's always somebody else's fault with this guy. Both of these guys. Always someone else. So next he goes on to say that all people do is sit around and judge him. But they don't know that the truth is he's out there in the AA herd saving lives. And he actually said that's what he does. He saves lives by sharing his story. So he's describing himself here as becoming anxious and desperate to get to a place that would be beneficial to his recovery. And he's calling everyone that he can for help. Because if he doesn't get the help that he's entitled to from the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut, then he's going to go off the deep end. He also said that the house that he was staying at was shut down by the feds because of all sorts of administrative malfeasance. Again, everybody else's fault. It's never his, right? Right. So when Hayes' urine test was tampered with, allegedly, and came back dirty, it was a huge disappointment for those that Steven Hayes was preaching to about AA. That his dirty test ruined his credibility and his reputation, and everything was just irrevocably damaged. And he says it damn nearly destroyed him. And he took another urine test the next day, which he said came back clean, but it was too late. Everyone had already turned against him, including his family. With the exception of his counselor at the house that he was staying at, everybody else just wanted nothing to do with him anymore because they saw him as a liar. But then he said after they, whoever they are, set him up to fail the urine test, that his counselor actually quit her whole entire job because of what they were trying to do to him specifically. So yeah, he was so wronged at this place that his counselor quit her career over it. Right. So anyway, like I said, after Hayes got that dirty test result, his family, including his daughter and his son, refused to have anything to do with him, according to him. Like, oh, poor me, my kids have turned on me, blah, blah, blah. His wife didn't believe him. His mom didn't believe him. He tested dirty and was sent back to prison, and then was released again in 2007. He says that when he got out, he was clean and sober, that within a couple of days, he applied for and was hired at a job doing landscaping. He even said that he had 2 jobs, but he was having serious money problems. His mom had some big time money problems too. His brother was living there at their mom's house as well, but there was no room for him, so he was relegated to sleeping on the ground. According to Hayes, his brother was the one now struggling with addiction. He was the one who was staying clean and sober and doing well, right? He claimed that things used to be the other way around, that his brother had always been the responsible one, the golden child, and Hayes was the one who was the screw-up and the drug addict. But by the time he got out of jail, Hayes claims that he's the one that was doing well, and it was his brother who became the problem child of the family, that he was out there working hard, bringing home paychecks, turning those paychecks over to his mom, and he says that she's turning around and giving all the money that he gives to her to his brother so he can go get high. So this guy who poured gasoline on a mother and her 2 daughters and then set the house ablaze, killing them all, wants us to believe that he's turning all his money over to his mother and just sits quietly by while she gives all that money that he earned to his brother so that he can turn around and smoke it all up or shoot it all up. I don't know exactly what Hayes is doing or if he's working, but I'll never believe this man put anybody ahead of himself. And you're going to find out a little bit later on in this conversation that he's having on this podcast that he's about to get kicked out of the house. So if he's working and earning money and handing his checks over to his mom, then why the hell is she kicking him out? Probably because he's a liar and none of this is happening. Towards the end of the first part of this podcast series, the host of the show asked Steven Hayes about where they were and the time frame it was when Joshua first brought up the idea of a home invasion burglary. He started saying how they would pull it off, and of course Hayes was like, no, we can't do something like that. That's a crime. That's too complicated. There's too much that can go off the rails. But it was a little while later, after Joshua started talking about doing this home invasion, that he told Hayes that he was clean off the drugs and everything and wanted to start getting involved in the recovery program in an AA. So Hayes figured that Joshua had not been in his right mind, that he was still getting high and not thinking straight when he started talking about doing a home invasion robbery. Hayes said that Joshua didn't think it was possible for him to get clean, so he always was talking about doing really stupid things to try to make fast money, like pulling off a home invasion. So when 2007 came around, Hayes claims that things started going downhill with his mom and his brother, because he had claimed that the 2 of them had pretty much swapped roles and he was the good brother and his brother was the bad one. But apparently his brother was working on winning mom back over and was doing so by throwing Hayes under the bus and pointing out that he had failed that urine test that time that sent him back to prison. He always used that against him to try to win favor with their mom. So according to Hayes, his mom just decided to believe his brother and believe that he failed the drug test. So he carries on and on about how he gives all this money to his mom, that he has a car but it's broken down, he can't seem to get the money together to get it running, he can't get it registered, he tried buying another car but he didn't qualify for the loan. So then he started drinking again and he pretty much quit AA, and in short order he got a gun, and at this point the phone call ran out of time and it cut off, And it sounded like Hayes was kind of under the impression that this would be the end of the conversation and was saying something as he was signing off, but then it cut off. There are 3 more parts to this, I believe, so there's more. Steven Hayes didn't say much of anything in the first part of the interview about the home invasion or the murders. He just talked about himself to portray himself as like this AA warrior and this lifesaver. So when the conversation picked back up, Hayes talked about the gun that he acquired from somebody, he said. He said that he got it approximately 1 week prior to the invasion of the Petit home. He said that it was his plan all along to commit a robbery. That's what the gun was for. But after being conflicted morally, apparently, Hayes said to himself, I can't do a robbery. I just can't do that. So he changed his mind, and he said he decided that he was going to take his own life instead. So he got rid of the car that he had. He took that money and got some drugs and picked up a sex worker, and they were spending the evening in a motel getting high until one point when he asked the woman that he was with if she would go and do a food run. And he said that it was his plan to take his own life while she was gone. He took a few more hits off of whatever drug it was he was using, and he put the gun into his mouth, and conveniently this woman arrived back at the motel to ask him how he preferred to have his burger cooked. She apparently got very upset and was about to panic because of seeing him with this gun held up to himself. He said that he had left her a note telling this woman to take anything that she wanted, but all of a sudden this sex worker turned into some kind of therapist and ended up talking to Hayes for the rest of the evening. But Hayes insisted that he had already made up his mind that he was going to take his own life, but before he did so, he went ahead and took a shower while the woman waited for him in the room that they were in. When he got out of the shower, he noticed that the woman had a more concerned look on her face, and when he went to check the backpack that he had with him, his drugs, his wallet, and his money was still in there. So he ended up letting her have the rest of the drugs. He paid her for her time, and she left. He said after that, he had another car. I believe he was using his boss's vehicle. He drove over to a nearby reservoir, ostensibly to carry out his suicide there. But when he went to retrieve the gun out of his backpack, he noticed it was gone. So he doubled back to the motel that they had been staying at, and it's there he found a note that the sex worker had left him, asking him for his forgiveness for taking his gun. So yeah, again, another story to make himself out to be like the good guy in all of this, and a good guy that somebody like a sex worker, a random person that you don't even know, a stranger, would want to help him and save himself from himself. You know what I mean? So from there, Hayes just decided to go back to working at whatever job that he's claiming to be having at this time. But they were approaching the time of the home invasion, and his money problems, along with his mom's money problems, were still persisting. And it was getting to the point where he described it as his final weekend. His mom had already told him that he needed to get out of her house by the following Monday. Tensions between him and his brother were steadily getting worse. He was back on drugs. So that weekend, the weekend before he was set to be kicked out by his mom, he got in touch with Joshua on that Saturday or so and told him that he was down to do the home invasion burglary. And this is where his story starts to line up a little bit where we started off with Josh's confession the day of, or maybe like the day before, or even like the weekend before. They met up at the Stop and Shop where Hayes parked his vehicle that he was driving. Joshua had said in his confession that Hayes was driving... Excuse me, I just burped. He said that Hayes was driving his boss's vehicle at the time since he had gotten rid of his. So they got together at the Stop and Shop. Hayes got into Josh's car and they started driving around. They found a house that they wanted to burglarize, according to Hayes, and Joshua went inside, but then shortly afterwards came back out. Hayes said he stayed in the car. When Joshua came back out, he convinced him not to do this home invasion job. Hayes here decided to just talk Joshua out of this because there seemed to be too many people inside. It was too hard to control everybody. But Josh wanted to apparently try a second house, so they targeted another one. They both went inside the house this time, and it immediately became apparent that they had gone into a fraternity house, these dumbasses. Everybody inside was a bunch of young college guys. Joshua apparently had a knife, and the evening before, the two of them had gone to Walmart where they purchased like a fake but realistic kind of looking gun. Hayes said it was made out of plastic. They also said they purchased a package of zip ties. So when they assessed the occupants of this house, the second house that they've broken into, they figured that they didn't have a real effective weapon, and there were at least 5 college guys present. Hayes was telling Josh they're not going to be able to take those guys. So he was able to talk Josh out of doing the home invasion for a second time now. So then they went to a third house, but they were unable to gain access to the home, and by this time it was getting close to sunrise, so they went back to their cars. Hayes was in an even worse situation than before this stupid evening of breaking into homes, because now he was back at his vehicle and he was completely on empty. He had no gas. Joshua ended up giving him $20, and it turned out that Joshua had ended up grabbing at least 1 or 2 wallets from some of the houses that they had just broken into, and apparently collected a couple of $100, but only gave Hayes $20 of it. So he ended up putting $10 into the gas tank, and he kept the other $10. Of course, the next day he's going to drink it up at a bar and get a couple of beers. He went home that morning, and he was sitting there in his mom's house thinking that he was out of time. He was getting kicked out. He kept saying, I was about to be homeless. I was about to be homeless. And I'm keep wanting to tell him, nobody gives a shit. Nobody gives a shit. He arrived at the conclusion that he and Joshua needed to try again. They had to pull off a successful home invasion. He had no other options. So he contacted Joshua, and this time Joshua told Hayes that he believed he had the perfect house that they could burglarize. So if you recall back to Joshua's confession, he said that he had spotted Jennifer and Michaela Petit at the Stop and Shop, and that he ended up following them home. And from there, he determined that they were a family of 4. There was the dad, the mom, and the 2 daughters. Surely the 2 of them, meaning Joshua and Steven Hayes, the 2 of them could take them, right? So Hayes agreed, and they set a time to meet up again at the Stop and Shop. Hayes said that on his way there the next evening, he stopped at the bar for some drinks because he was pretty nervous and he needed to calm down, and they drove over to the Petit house around 9 or 10 p.m. Hayes said Joshua wanted to spend some time driving around the neighborhood to check it out, canvassing the surrounding areas. At some point, Joshua got out of the car and took a quick look around the Petit house, and after that, they drove around for a little bit more. Hayes, at this point in his interview, started talking about how in the immediate aftermath of the Cheshire murders, Joshua was the one who immediately provided a statement and a full confession. And in it, he basically laid the blame for everything that had happened onto Steven Hayes. But according to Hayes, the media up and ran with Joshua's version of the events because he was the younger of the 2. Hayes had a much more extensive criminal background, whereas Joshua had only one brush with the law. And since the media assumed that because he was the older, more experienced of the 2, that he was the mastermind behind the whole thing. And Joshua played that angle well in his confession, or at least he thought he did. But we all know at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter who did what if you're both willing participants in the commission of a crime. But Steven Hayes claims that once the investigation got underway, authorities were the ones who began to realize that the responsibility for all of this is squarely on Joshua and not him. Hayes claimed that Joshua denied going with him to the Walmart when he was talking to investigators when they purchased that fake gun and the zip ties. But I don't think that Joshua denied that in his confession. He may have tried to deny it at other points in time, but ultimately Joshua admitted to going into the Walmart with Hayes. He did say that he went inside. Hayes said that they were seen on surveillance, and he said in the video you can see Joshua giving Hayes the money to purchase the stuff. So, dreamers, one of the things that I learned from listening to Hayes is that the whole thing with Joshua randomly encountering Jennifer and Michaela Petit at the Stop and Shop may not have been as random as Joshua made it seem to be in his confession. In this recorded phone call from jail, Hayes said that the day or two before he was set to get kicked out of his mom's house, Hayes contacted Joshua about going through with this home invasion plan. Hayes claimed that he was the one who wasn't keen on this idea, but everything was coming down to the wire. He was running out of time, he was out of options, and he wanted to go ahead with the plan. Well, at the time this conversation was happening, Joshua was sitting in his vehicle at the Stop and Shop parking lot. Now, I don't know if it was at or around that time when he was having this conversation with Hayes on the phone that's when he spotted Jennifer and Michaela. He may have seen them come and go, but I'm starting to have doubts about his version of how he chose the Petit's home to invade. If you recall in the transcript of his confession, he said that he saw Jennifer and Michaela pull up in a nice car and they went inside the Stop and Shop. He said that he was conducting business with his boss that he had done some work for, and that by the time his boss left, Jennifer and Michaela were coming out of the store. He said that he watched them get into the nice car, so he decided to follow them. And then when he got to their home, Joshua said that he saw that they had a nice house and that there was probably a lot of money and a lot of valuables inside. Well, in his interview, Hayes said that the house where Joshua was living at the time, I believe it was his mother's house or his parents' house, but I believe his daughter was living there too because Joshua had a kid also. At the time that this crime took place, Joshua was living 1,000 feet away from the Petits. That's about 300 meters if you're metric. According to Hayes, Joshua was already aware of and very familiar with the Petits and suggested that he had been stalking one or both of the daughters for quite some time. In addition to that, Joshua already had somewhat of a reputation in the neighborhood for looking around at people's houses and being a creep around girls. So yeah, according to Hayes, this was not something random that came together at the Stop and Shop when he saw Michaela and Jennifer. He already knew them. This was something Joshua had been thinking about for a long time. He was interested in one or both of the Petit girls, and that this was never meant to be a home invasion burglary on its own, but it also had a sexual assault component that it feels like Joshua was planning all along. Steven Hayes did sexually assault Jennifer Petit. I believe he's going to talk about it a little bit later on in this interview. So he's just as much of a garbage human being as Joshua is. But, they're each telling a story that had them in the most favorable light in each of their so-called confessions. So after they met up at the Stop and Shop, Hayes said that the two of them went to the bar for a little while. And then they drove around, and then they ended up near the Petit house. He said that's when Joshua got out of the vehicle and went looking around the house and came back and said everything looked good. So they went back to the bar for a few more drinks and stayed till around 2 a.m. And that's when they went back to the Petit house to carry out the home invasion. According to Hayes, he had no idea where they were. He said that he was not familiar with the town of Cheshire, so they ended up back at the Petit house, parked a little ways away from it, all on Josh's instruction. Hayes is just going along. He says he has no idea where he's at. Remember in Joshua's confession, he started to get nervous about where his car was parked when it was coming time for sunrise? That makes more sense now that we know that he lived nearby, because he would be worried about his car being randomly parked there because he's doing this crime in his own neighborhood, and neighbors are likely to recognize whose car is whose. The Petits were literally Joshua Komisarjevsky's neighbors. If someone saw his car and they were familiar with whose car is whose, like I said, then it's going to stand out and it's going to raise suspicion, especially when the investigation begins into what they're about to do. So they get back to the house, and Joshua immediately goes into the Bilko doors that lead into the basement. Hayes pointed out that Joshua already knew exactly where to go and how to get into the house. He could tell that Joshua had already become quite familiar with the layout of the house. He had already done some previous reconnaissance. It's pretty obvious. When they had been driving around looking at houses to break into before, Joshua would get out of the car and spend time looking around the whole outside of the house to try to find the easiest way to break in, but he didn't do this at the Petit's house. He went straight for the Bilko doors. Another thing that Hayes pointed out is that another thing that he had done differently was during the previous times that they broke into houses, Joshua took the fake gun with him inside. This time, when he went into the Petit house through the basement, he didn't take the gun, which left Hayes assuming that Joshua was comfortable enough with the family, that he was confident he would be able to control the situation because 3 of them were women and 2 of them were children. So, as Hayes says, he's waiting outside in the car, and suddenly he can see Joshua in the sunroom begin the attack on Dr. Petit. He said that he could see that he had a baseball bat. At that point, Hayes claimed that he started to try to motion to Joshua to come on, let's go. Oh no, what are you trying to do? Hayes said that he didn't know that this was part of the plan. He had no idea that Joshua was going to beat Dr. Petit about the head with a baseball bat. In Joshua's confession, which was much more detailed about this, I found what he said about the plan to incapacitate Dr. Petit, because they could see that he was asleep in the sunroom, was something that the 2 of them had discussed as they prepared to begin the attack. And Joshua said that it was Hayes who was pushing him to continue to beat Dr. Petit several times, but Joshua had such a hard time with it because he had never attacked anybody like that, and the sound that the bat was making and hitting him in the head was really getting to him. So I tend to lean a little bit more towards Joshua's version that I went over in his confession. When Hayes said that he didn't know anything about any plan to attack Dr. Petit, I don't believe him. So they have Dr. Petit there bleeding profusely from like 5 or 6 open, gaping wounds in his head, according to Hayes. He wasn't sure what to do next because this wasn't part of the plan, he said. He said that he wasn't able to tie up Dr. Petit because he, talking about himself, Hayes, was so messed up and so screwed up in the head over what they were doing. He said that they weren't supposed to do this. This wasn't supposed to happen. Joshua was supposed to open the sunroom door and I guess quietly let Hayes in, and together they would take control over Dr. Petit and tie him up first. Then they would go upstairs and tie up the rest of the family and then burglarize the house and just leave. Nobody was supposed to be seriously injured like that. Hayes insisted that that was all it was supposed to be. That was all that was supposed to happen. Just get money, get valuables, let the family go, and then get out of there as quickly as possible. So what they do next is they tie up Dr. Petit. Neither one of these fools really takes responsibility for tying anybody up. I mean, Josh, they both kind of say it. They did it together at various points in time. Sometimes in Joshua's confession, he would say, we tied, just to take all of the blame off of himself. And the way that Hayes words things is he says it like this. So at that point, we were like, okay, yeah, tied up Dr. Petit. That's what he said, those exact words. Not really saying, we tied up Dr. Petit, or I tied him up, or he tied him up. He just says, tied up Dr. Petit. He says that he was kind of surprised that nobody was screaming or yelling out at this point. I guess he expected all this chaos, but the family remained relatively calm. So after they tied up Dr. Petit, they went upstairs. The first bedroom that they came across was Hayley's. She was asleep in there, and they walked past her door and down the hallway to the master bedroom. Jennifer and Michaela were in there together. They had fallen asleep with the light on and the TV on. So the 2 of them decided to go back to Hayley's room and to get her under control first, and then they would go back to the master bedroom. They went into Hayley's bedroom and woke her up, and I can only imagine the terror that went through this poor child. They told her that they were there for money, not for anything else, that nobody was going to get hurt, and they proceeded to tie her up. I'm pretty sure that there are no amounts of reassuring words that could help this girl, but somehow, some way, she managed to maintain her composure throughout it all. After they tied up Hayley, they went back to the master bedroom. Joshua went to the side of the bed where Michaela was asleep on, and Hayes went to the side that Jennifer was at. They woke the two of them up simultaneously and told them the same things that they had told Hayley, that they were there for money, that nobody's going to get hurt. Joshua took Michaela to her own bedroom while Hayes tied Jennifer up. And he said, "I secured Ms. Petit." That's how he worded it. He didn't say I tied up the mom. He said I secured her. He said that he continued to reassure Jennifer that they were only there for money and that they didn't want to hurt anybody. And that helped Jennifer to stay calm. At least that's what it seemed to him. After they tied up Jennifer, Michaela, and Hayley, Hayes said that he and Joshua went back downstairs to check on Dr. Petit, who they left bleeding and bound in the sunroom. From there, they decided to put him into the basement, and they tied him up down there. Hayes was pretty sure Dr. Petit was not going to survive his injuries. He had lost a lot of blood. And I don't think anybody ever really said it outright, but in this phone interview with Hayes that I listened to, at one point he said that Dr. Petit had become so severely injured by the beating that Joshua gave him that they had to make sure to keep him separate from the rest of the family. He didn't specifically say why, but I believe it was to ensure that the mom and girls would remain calm throughout the evening. If they were to see their dad in that condition that he was in, they would have probably freaked out and their levels of fear would have skyrocketed. From there, Hayes said that Joshua spent most of the time in Michaela's room, apparently telling Hayes that he was trying to work on keeping her calm since she was the youngest. So they divided up who was going to be responsible for checking on who. Joshua would be in charge of Michaela and Dr. Petit, and Hayes said that he would be in charge of Jennifer and Hayley. What that meant was they would let their hostages go to the bathroom on occasion or offer them water. But then Hayes goes on to say that he wasn't following criminal protocol because he didn't take the time to inspect the bathrooms before letting the hostages use them, pointing out that they could have had weapons or guns or knives or spare phones or panic buttons in there. I mean, that's just how juvenile Hayes' thinking is. Not that I would ever have mistaken either one of these pieces of crap for a genius, but he was just saying, like, I didn't know what I was doing. I let Hayley go to the bathroom twice and I offered her some water, but he just didn't think to do things the way a real criminal mastermind would have done it because obviously he is no criminal mastermind whatsoever. He said that he let Jennifer Petit go to the bathroom once, and he pointed out how he worked really hard at making sure that he treated those women with respect and dignity. Those were the two exact words that he used. This man is able to look back on this crime like a decade after the fact, and he's able to say that he treated these poor people with dignity and respect? What the actual fuck, right? After everything we know, all the horrible details of this crime, everything that they did, dignity and respect? This guy has some nerve. So he's up in the Petit house, treating these people with dignity and respect. If this is what he thinks dignity and respect looks like, I'd hate to see what he thinks shame and humiliation and disrespect and violence must look like in his stupid little mind. He pointed out again how Joshua was spending most of his time with Michaela. He likes to keep pointing that out to make him look like the worst person because he's messing around with this child that's so young, which I get that, but it doesn't take away from what he did. It's like, just no, stop. You're still like a piece of shit. Anyway, so he pointed out how Josh was spending most of his time with Michaela while he was busy ransacking the house and running up and down into the basement to grab beers throughout the night. Hayes said at some point he came to realize that a hole had opened up in his glove. So they started to have this discussion, he and Joshua started to have a discussion about fingerprints and DNA. And here again is where Hayes' story differs from Joshua's version. When they were sitting there talking about fingerprints and DNA that could have potentially been left in all the places Hayes had been touching and searching, he said that Joshua stated, "You know, fire destroys everything." In Joshua's confession, he said that Hayes suddenly began panicking about DNA being left all over the house and was ultimately the one who came up with the idea that they needed to burn the house down in order to destroy all the evidence. When it comes to whose story I believe, in this case, I'm leaning towards Joshua because he's not the one that's suddenly worried about leaving fingerprints and DNA evidence behind. Hayes was the one. Why would Joshua care to come up with an idea to burn down the whole house when Hayes was the one who started all the whole hoopla about the DNA in the first place? He even said in his interview on this podcast that he suddenly realized his glove had broken open. That's an I'm so screwed moment when that realization came down upon him, and that's why I think he was the one that panicked and thought about burning down the house and not Joshua. So Hayes says Joshua is the one who brought up the idea of destroying the evidence by setting everything on fire. And Hayes, he's just like appalled at the idea, right? Saying that he was not on board with that idea at all whatsoever at first. The problem was he couldn't remember everything throughout the house that he put his gross, grubby, murdery hands on. So he agreed with Joshua that fire would be the only way to destroy all of the DNA evidence that they both potentially left behind. And remember, in Joshua's confession, he said that both of their DNA was in the national database. So if they left this house standing and they started swabbing or finding things when the investigation began, they would be finding touch DNA and they would be identified right away. Okay, dreamers, I'm going to go ahead and end part 2 here. I think there's only going to be 3 parts to this one. It might be 4. I will wrap up the final 20 minutes or so of Steven Hayes' interview when we come back in the next part. So keep a lookout for not only the 3rd part, but also this month's Patreon episode as well. That will be up shortly. I will be traveling to California, I think next week, possibly. My car is still in California at the Hyundai dealership getting a brand new engine because there is some kind of crazy recall. So my car's in California. I have my daughter's car. She has the dogs. We are all over the place right now. Then she's going to come here for Thanksgiving. And then I'm going to go there for the funeral at the end of the month. And and then we're going to be into December, and I'm going to try to get my ass into gear for you guys. So my other podcast I wanted to talk about real quick that I host with Justin from Mysterious Circumstances now has 3 episodes out. I know it's not everybody's thing, but if you do watch Only Murders in the Building on Hulu, then I would dare to say that Only Us in the Building might just be the perfect companion podcast to your TV viewing. And if you listen and you like, leave us a nice review on whatever platform you listen to the show on. And if you would like a show sticker, possibly even a fridge magnet, you can send me your mailing information to onlyusinthebuilding@gmail.com, and I will get those things sent out to you. If you're a fan of Only Us in the Building and you want show stickers, show magnets, send your emails. All right, I will be back shortly with the 3rd, possibly final part of this. I don't know. It depends how much I have to say about this tragic case. But that's all I've got for this week. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, sweet dreams.